April 17, 1944. By the early morning fog clung stubbornly to the steel spines of Pittsburgh's industrial district, curling through the massive chimneys like ghosts. The train screeched to a halt, and a group of German prisoners of war, their uniforms worn thin and stained with months of European mud, stepped onto the platform. Their boots clicked on the cold, damp concrete. There was a nervous energy in the air, an unspoken tension between the guards and the prisoners, and among the prisoners themselves. They had heard stories of American factories, of course. Rumors whispered in the camps suggested something almost unreal. But no story could prepare them for what they were about to witness. As the POWs were herded into buses and driven past the outskirts of the city, the scale of the operation became apparent. Smokestacks towered into the gray sky like iron giants. Smoke and steam formed an unbroken haze above the city, shimmering under the weak April sun. Workers moved like ants, tiny figures against the titanic backdrop of steel. And then, for the first time, they glimpsed the massive hangars, buildings so vast they seemed more like small cities than factories. Inside, the air was thick with oil, grease, and the sharp tang of molten metal. Thousands of men and women moved through the assembly lines, each performing a precise task, each motion contributing to a symphony of industrial output. The German soldiers walked slowly, trying to take it all in. Planes in various stages of assembly stretched in every direction. Wings, fuselages, engines, all being put together simultaneously. And above them, scaffolding and cranes lifted enormous components into place with an efficiency that seemed almost surgical. Sergeant Klaus Reinhardt, a 28-year-old Luftwaffe mechanic captured during a bombing raid over Hamburg, ran his hand over his forehead, leaving a streak of dirt in the shape of disbelief. "I have seen factories," he murmured to Lieutenant Dieter Bauer beside him. "But nothing like this. Nothing." Bauer's jaw tightened. He was quiet for a moment, scanning the enormous floor with his pale blue eyes. It's like they're building the entire Air Force at once," he whispered back. Neither of them could hide the mixture of awe and creeping fear that crawled along their spines. They moved down a catwalk above the assembly line, the roar of thousands of machines filling their ears. Each noise, the whine of a drill, the clatter of metal, the hiss of welding torches, became part of a terrifyingly beautiful orchestra. You can almost feel it, the sheer magnitude of human effort, coordinated with a precision they had only dreamed of in theory. This wasn't just production. It was war made manifest in steel and sweat. But it wasn't only the scale that stunned them. It was the people. Women worked alongside men in perfect harmony, their hands deftly maneuvering tools that required years of practice. Yet they moved with a grace that made the impossible look routine. The POWs exchanged uneasy glances. Back home in Germany, entire factories had been reduced to rubble. Workers conscripted into the war, often starving, working under bombs that fell night after night. Here, thousands moved freely, building planes at a rate that seemed almost obscene. And no bombs fell, none. The guides, American supervisors in neat overalls, moved among them with brisk efficiency. "Next station, Group 3, one barked. They spoke in clipped tones, pointing, explaining, gesturing with a confidence that suggested nothing could ever go wrong here. Reinhardt felt a pang of envy he couldn't name. Here, the war seemed manageable, controllable even. In Europe, the front lines were chaos, uncertainty, death at every turn. Here, the machinery of victory was humming perfectly. Each part in place, each worker a cog in an unstoppable engine. Then they reached the storage yards, and the scale of it finally hit them. Row after row of aircraft parts, engines stacked like blocks, crates stamped with numbers and codes, all waiting to be assembled or shipped to the front. Thousands of planes could be built here without pause, and yet the lines never seemed to end. Reinhardt's stomach turned. They had fought hard, endured bombings and retreats, believing in German ingenuity, German superiority. And now, this. It was almost too much to grasp. A fellow POW, Unteroffizier Heinz Langer, whispered in disbelief, If Germany had factories like this, maybe we could have. He trailed off, shaking his head. There was a heaviness in the air, a dawning realization that the war might already be slipping from their grasp. Bauer gripped the railing tightly, knuckles white. He could hear it in the other men's murmurs, see it in their vacant stares. This tour, intended perhaps to impress or intimidate, was having the opposite effect. And then came the final blow. The test flight field. Outside the hangar doors, dozens of completed aircraft were lined up, their propellers glinting under the weak sun. Engines roared to life one by one, and the POWs felt the vibrations through the soles of their boots. Planes taxied, lifted, and soared into the sky in perfect formation. It was the kind of sight that made even hardened soldiers catch their breath. This wasn't just production. This was dominance. Klaus. Reinhardt's eyes followed one particularly sleek fighter as it banked sharply, disappearing into the clouds. He felt a chill. Could Germany really win against this? Could their bombed-out cities and depleted factories even begin to compete? He swallowed hard, trying to steady himself, trying to cling to the illusions he had carried from Europe. But the illusion was cracking, and somewhere deep inside he knew it. A sudden, almost imperceptible tension gripped the group. Not all the men spoke, but every gaze seemed to ask the same question. How do you fight an enemy that can build the sky itself? The air inside the Pittsburgh hangar was a living thing, vibrating with power and motion. You could almost feel it pressing against your chest. The German POWs shuffled forward, their eyes wide, following the endless rows of assembly lines that stretched farther than any horizon they had known. Sparks flew from welding torches, hammering punctuated the low hum of machinery, and the scent of hot metal mixed with oil in a thick, almost tangible haze. Every step forward seemed to pull them deeper into a world they could never have imagined. Lucas Müller, a 24-year-old Feldwebel captured during a raid over Normandy, blinked rapidly, trying to process the organized chaos. "It's unreal," he muttered under his breath. Around him, hundreds of workers moved like clockwork. Men and women, young and old, their faces etched with concentration, yet their motions smooth, effortless. Each task was precise, almost ritualistic. One woman lifted an engine block as if it weighed nothing. A man below tightened bolts with mechanical precision, never missing a beat. To the POWs, it was like watching a carefully choreographed dance, a performance powered by sheer human will and ingenuity. They passed line after line of aircraft in various stages of assembly. Some fuselages were skeletal frameworks of aluminum ribs, others almost complete, painted and gleaming under the harsh industrial lights. Wings were attached by cranes larger than any building in their hometowns. Propellers spun experimentally as mechanics tested engines. The sheer volume of work left the POWs stunned. Reinhardt whispered to Bauer, "In one day, they make more planes than we've ever seen in an entire division." Bauer nodded but didn't answer, his gaze glued to a formation of fighters, being lifted in unison by giant, overhead cranes. Each plane moved like a living creature, yet perfectly synchronized, obeying commands no human could have enforced without machinery. And then came the humans. In Europe, factories were often skeletal after bombings, staffed with exhausted men and conscripted women barely able to lift tools. Here, the POWs saw vigor, discipline, and pride. Women wielded rivet guns as if they were extensions of their own arms, while men maneuvered engines and wing sections with the same care a surgeon gives a patient. There was a rhythm to it, a pulse that made the hangar feel alive. It was production on a scale that made their wartime experiences feel small and fragile, like children playing with blocks while giants built empires. The POWs were led along catwalks above the assembly floor, allowing them to take in the full scope. From this vantage, the hangar seemed endless, a cathedral of steel and sweat. Workers below were tiny, like ants in a perfect colony. Reinhardt could hear the constant hiss of welding, the whirring of drills, and the metallic clang of tools, each sound layered over the other, to form a symphony of creation, a soundtrack to industrial omnipotence. He felt a shiver run down his spine. Could Germany ever match this? He didn't know, but he felt the first seeds of doubt planting themselves deep in his mind. Suddenly, a massive fighter aircraft rolled past on a conveyor, its engines growling as if the machine itself had a heartbeat. The POWs stepped back instinctively. The Americans around them didn't flinch. They barely noticed the behemoth gliding inches from their boots. Reinhardt's eyes followed it until it disappeared behind a curtain of scaffolding. We're finished," muttered Langer, his voice barely audible. Bauer struck him lightly on the shoulder. "Not finished, just behind." But even he sounded uncertain. The next section of the tour brought them to a smaller hall where engines were tested. Rows of radial engines roared to life simultaneously, vibrating the floor and rattling the POWs' teeth. Oil mist clung to their jackets, and the deafening noise forced them to shout to hear each other. Reinhardt pressed a hand to his chest. It felt as if the very heartbeat of America were inside this building. Each engine was a testament to precision, to resources, to a system designed to produce death from the sky, but also survival from efficiency. Here, technology and manpower combined in a way the Germans had never seen firsthand. They moved to the shipping docks next. Crates stamped with codes and serial numbers were stacked impossibly high, ready to be shipped to every front. Tanks, artillery shells, and spare parts were everywhere. Workers hustled, forklifts zipped along narrow paths, and men loaded crates with a speed that left the POWs breathless. Bauer's hand hovered over his mouth. "We thought our factories were large. We thought we had strength," he muttered. Reinhardt just shook his head. This is a war machine." And then, as they were led back toward the main hall, the POWs were shown the schedule board, a massive wall covered in charts, production quotas, shipment schedules, and testing timelines. Each number represented dozens of planes, thousands of parts, weeks of coordinated effort. It was all meticulously planned, tracked, and executed. Reinhardt's stomach turned. Germany's once mighty industrial system had been fragmented by bombings, shortages, and despair. And here, in neutral America, production marched forward with relentless precision. The final shock came when the POWs were taken outside to watch a line of completed aircraft taxi onto the airstrip. Engines roaring, propellers spinning, they lifted gracefully into the sky in formation. Reinhardt couldn't look away. Langer's hand trembled as he reached for his cap. Every plane that disappeared into the clouds was a reminder. The scale of American production was beyond imagination, beyond replication. Here, war was industrialized into perfection, an unstoppable force that Germany could barely hope to challenge. For the first time, the POWs felt the weight of reality pressed down on them. The war they thought they understood. The war they had fought, sacrificed, and bled for suddenly seemed smaller, fragile, almost naive. And as the roar of the engines faded into the distance, a silent question lingered among them all. How do you fight a country that can replace the sky itself? By mid-afternoon, the sun had burned through Pittsburgh's morning fog. But inside the Detroit-bound train car, the air was heavy with thought. The German POWs sat in silence, the hum of wheels on steel rails, blending with the echoes of the factory. They had just toured. None of them spoke, but every face carried the same weight: disbelief, awe, and an almost primal fear. Reinhardt stared out the grimy window at the passing industrial skyline, fingers tracing the condensation on the glass. Factories rose like fortresses along the river, smokestacks belching a constant plume of black and white. He could almost hear the pulse of machinery, the heartbeat of an army of production that never stopped. They had seen scale before, in European factories, in occupied territories, but nothing had prepared them for this. Here, thousands of planes were being built simultaneously. Thousands, and each day, more planes would join the sky, more bombs would fall on distant fronts. When they arrived in Detroit, the POWs were led straight into the heart of the city's munitions district. Here, the scale was even more staggering. Hall after hall, Warehouse after warehouse stretched as far as the eye could see. Tanks gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Artillery shells stacked like monoliths of impending destruction. Bombs crated in neat rows as if waiting for an invisible hand to deploy them. The roar of machinery was deafening, a continuous, relentless hum that made human labor feel like a single, coordinated organism. Sergeant Reinhardt couldn't stop staring. This is industrial warfare, he muttered to Bauer, who stood rigid, lips pressed tight. The realization dawned slowly, insidiously. They had been trained to respect German efficiency, German engineering, German discipline, yet here, every preconception was being shattered. These Americans were not only producing, they were perfecting, optimizing, exceeding anything the Wehrmacht could muster. The POWs were then taken to a test firing range. Artillery boomed with such force that the ground shook under their boots. Smoke and flame erupted from the cannon mouths, and shells flew into the distant hills. Langer, whose hands had never stopped trembling, whispered, "And they make this every day?" Bauer nodded grimly. "They don't just make it. They mass-produce it, faster than we can even hope to use." They were led next to a massive assembly hall where bomb casings were being filled and inspected. Workers in white coats moved quickly, checking every seam, every rivet. A single mistake here could be catastrophic, yet the process was flawless, methodical. Reinhardt watched as crates were moved onto conveyor belts, transported and stacked with surgical precision. Every step of production was accounted for, every error eliminated before it could occur. It was terrifying and brilliant. In a quieter moment, Reinhardt and Bauer found themselves alone near a row of completed tanks. The metal gleamed under the factory lights, tracks polished and engines humming softly. Bauer rested a hand on the cold steel, feeling its weight. "Klaus, we've seen what they can do. Do you think we can win this?" Reinhardt didn't answer immediately. He watched a worker climb atop one of the tanks, checking its systems with the ease of someone performing a daily ritual. He wanted to say yes, to cling to hope, but the truth lodged in his throat. I don't know," he finally admitted. The most haunting moment came as the POWs were taken outside to observe test flights. Row upon row of fighters and bombers lined the runway, engines growling like predators. One by one, they roared down the tarmac, lifted gracefully, and vanished into the sky in precise formations. Reinhardt could feel the vibrations in his chest, hear the echo of power that seemed endless. The scale, the speed, the sheer audacity of it left him breathless. As they watched, Langer turned to Bauer, voice barely audible over the engines. "All those planes? In a day? In a week? They could wipe out cities faster than we can rebuild them." Bauer didn't respond. His jaw was tight, eyes fixed on the horizon. They all understood it. Unspoken, yet undeniable. The war they had imagined fighting, one of skill, courage, and German engineering, now seemed hopelessly outmatched. The guides noticed their reactions. One supervisor, a tall man in his 40s with a clipboard, stopped beside the POWs. "Impressive, isn't it?" he said casually. Reinhardt could only nod, unable to speak. Langer's hands were clenched into fists, knuckles white. "It's overwhelming," he muttered. The supervisor smiled, almost patronizingly, and gestured toward the next assembly hall. "And this is just the beginning." It hit them then, with the sudden force of a bomb. The Americans weren't just building planes or tanks or bombs. They were building momentum, a war machine that could outproduce, outlast, and outfight anything Germany had left. Factories untouched by enemy bombs, workers protected, materials plentiful, every advantage Germany had lost was present here in abundance. Reinhardt's stomach sank. The war, he realized, wasn't just about soldiers on the front lines anymore. It was about steel, production, and relentless efficiency. As the POWs were herded back into the bus, the sun dipped low over Detroit, casting long shadows across the sprawling industrial landscape. The smoke from chimneys painted the sky with streaks of orange and gray. The soldiers sat in silence, each lost in thoughts they couldn't share aloud. How could a nation, still untouched at home, produce so much? How could Germany, with shattered cities and exhausted laborers, ever hope to compete? Reinhardt's eyes met Bauer's. Neither spoke, but both understood the same unspoken truth. The war wasn't just shifting. It was being decided, here in these factories far from the front lines. The POWs had walked through the heart of the American war machine, and they were powerless to stop it. And yet, as the bus rumbled forward, the shadows lengthened, and a chilling question lingered in every mind. If this is just the beginning, what will the end look like? April 19th, 1944. The buses rolled through Detroit, the city alive with a rhythm the POWs could barely comprehend. Factories stretched like endless lines of steel teeth, grinding out weapons of war with terrifying precision. The streets were alive with trucks, forklifts, and workers carrying crates that dwarfed any machine the Germans had seen in Europe. Even from the window, Reinhardt could feel the hum of power. A mechanical heartbeat, steady and relentless. They were led first to a massive tank assembly hall. The sheer size of the building swallowed the prisoners whole. Tanks in various stages of construction lined every inch of the floor, their heavy treads glinting under bright lights, engines waiting to roar. Workers moved like cogs in an enormous machine, welding, adjusting, checking, and double-checking with a speed and accuracy that left the Germans dumbstruck. The POWs walked along elevated catwalks, craning their necks to take in the scale. Each tank seemed enormous, but when they looked at the numbers being produced, it was almost incomprehensible. Dozens of tanks rolled off the line each week, enough to replace losses at the front lines almost instantly. Unteroffizier Langer couldn't stop shaking his head. In Berlin, our factories are destroyed. Our tanks can't reach the front fast enough. And here they're building hundreds in a month. Bauer's face was pale, eyes fixed on a Sherman tank being maneuvered by cranes into position. The German army prided itself on engineering superiority, yet these machines, mass-produced, standardized, reliable, were being created faster than any individual genius could invent them. It was industrial might distilled into metal and fire. The POWs were then taken to a munitions plant, and the scale of destruction they saw made the tanks feel almost tame in comparison. Rows upon rows of bomb casings, artillery shells, and ammunition crates stretched to infinity. The air was thick with a metallic tang, punctuated by the low hum of conveyor belts and the occasional metallic clang of testing equipment. Workers moved with synchronized efficiency, each step precise, each motion rehearsed 1,000 times. The Germans watched silently as shells were filled, inspected, and packed for shipment. Thousands, every single day. Reinhardt felt his stomach turn. In Europe, each shipment was precious, rationed carefully. Factories rebuilt after bombings only slowly replaced lost materiel. And here, in Detroit, the Americans could replace entire fronts' worth of weaponry almost overnight. Langer muttered under his breath, "We've fought hard, but against this. What hope do we have?" Bauer said nothing. He couldn't. Words would not convey the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Outside, the POWs were led to a testing range for bombs and artillery. Explosions shook the earth, clouds of black smoke spiraling into the sky. Shells were fired, bombs dropped, and the scale of American firepower became terrifyingly real. Each test was routine, calculated, and flawless. The Germans could feel the vibration through the soles of their boots. Each detonation was a reminder. This was not just production, this was preparation for domination. They were shown the shipping yards next, where crates filled with bombs, shells, and spare parts were loaded onto massive transport trucks and trains, bound for fronts across the globe. Reinhardt's eyes widened at the sheer logistics of it. The planning, the manpower, the coordination. In Europe, moving supplies was a nightmare. Here, it was almost an art form. The Germans had been trained to believe in their own efficiency, their precision engineering, yet nothing in their experience had prepared them for this relentless, unstoppable system. A young American supervisor noticed Reinhardt's gaze lingering on the loading docks. He smiled faintly, almost knowingly. Every crate leaves here on time. Every bomb, every shell, every tank. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is forgotten. Reinhardt swallowed hard. He wanted to argue, to cling to hope, but the weight of reality pressed down on him like steel. He had fought, he had endured, he had believed in German industry, and now he could only stare, helpless. And then, as the POWs were ushered outside, they saw a convoy of tanks and artillery rolling toward the distant horizon, ready to be shipped overseas. The Germans watched silently as the vehicles rumbled past, engines throbbing like living creatures, each one a testament to America's industrial power, each one a challenge to everything they had fought for. Bauer finally spoke, voice low, almost a whisper. This is why the Allies will win. Not because they fight harder, not because they are braver, but because they can outlast us, outproduce us, outthink us in sheer scale. Reinhardt could only nod, his throat tight. Langer's fists were clenched at his sides, white-knuckled, but no words came. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the Detroit factories. Smoke and fire painted the sky in streaks of orange and gray. The POWs sat in the back of the bus, silent, exhausted, and shaken. Each of them knew the same unspoken truth. The industrial gap they had witnessed today was not something Germany could bridge in time. The war was no longer just fought in the skies or on the ground. It was being waged in these factories, in these sprawling empires of steel, fire, and human labor. And as the bus rumbled forward, carrying them back to the camp, a chilling question lingered in their minds, unspoken but impossible to ignore. If this is what the enemy can build while we fight and die, what hope do we have left? Night had fallen when the POWs returned to their barracks. The dull hum of the camp generators and the distant clatter of guards' boots were the only sounds. Inside, the prisoners moved like shadows, their faces pale, minds racing. The images of steel, fire, and endless production haunted them, even in sleep. The roar of engines and the hiss of molten metal seemed to echo behind closed eyes. Reinhardt sat alone on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. He could still see it all. The vast hangars of Pittsburgh, the synchronized dance of workers, the endless rows of tanks in Detroit, and the test flights that tore across the sky like thunder. Every detail burned into his memory. He traced the mental map of American industry, precise, organized, unstoppable, and felt a knot of fear twist in his chest. Could Germany survive this? Could their own shattered factories, their bombed-out cities, even come close? Around him, other POWs whispered in small clusters. Langer muttered to a fellow soldier, "We thought the Allies were strong, but this is beyond imagining." Bauer, normally stoic, stared blankly at the floorboards, his hands folded over his knees. Even the hardened men, those who had survived the firestorms of Europe, could not hide the creeping dread. They were beginning to realize that the war was no longer fought only with courage, strategy, or experience. It was fought with steel, oil, manpower, and scale. And in every category, the Americans had already won. Letters exchanged among the prisoners told the same story. In hushed tones, they spoke of factories that seemed infinite, of bombs and planes that appeared faster than news could travel, of a nation mobilized with terrifying efficiency. The psychological weight of what they had seen settled heavily, pressing down on their thoughts, infecting every conversation with a mix of awe and despair. Reinhardt wrote in his journal, hands trembling, "We fight with what we have, but they build with what we cannot imagine. Each day our hope wanes, and I do not know if it can be regained." The next morning, a routine inspection brought the POWs outside, but their eyes were drawn once more to the horizon, to the silhouettes of factories they could see in the distance. Smoke rose from chimneys, like titans breathing fire into the sky. The memory of assembly lines, of thousands of planes moving as one, of bombs rolling off conveyor belts, lingered like a shadow. They had seen the machine of war in its purest, most terrifying form, and it had left them shaken to their core. Reinhardt and Bauer walked together along the perimeter fence, speaking in low tones. "I have fought in France, in Poland, in Belgium," Reinhardt said. "I have seen the destruction our armies can bring. And yet, today, I feel powerless." Bauer nodded slowly. "It is not our soldiers who fail us now. It is the factories we cannot replace, the production we cannot match. Every day, America grows stronger. Every day, we shrink." Langer, sitting on the grass nearby, finally broke the silence. "Do you think Germany can even hope to win this war?" His voice was barely audible. But Reinhardt and Bauer felt the weight of the question settle between them like a storm cloud. No one answered immediately. The unspoken truth was suffocating. After witnessing the full scale of American industry, victory seemed almost impossible. The POWs spent the following days in reflection. Some wrote letters home, struggling to find words that could explain what they had seen without shattering the morale of families already weary from years of war. Others sat silently, staring at the horizon, replaying images of factories and aircraft, each detail gnawing at their confidence. For many, the trip had stripped away the comforting illusions they had carried. The belief in German superiority, the faith that skill and courage could counter sheer industrial might. Yet, amid the despair, a strange, uneasy respect began to take root. The Americans had created something remarkable, something precise and unstoppable. Even enemies could not deny it. Reinhardt found himself thinking about the people they had seen, women and men, working tirelessly, moving as one, and wondered how such coordination could be replicated anywhere else in the world. The realization was bitter. Admiration mingled with fear, creating a complex, unsteady emotion that none of them had felt before. As the weeks passed, the POWs carried their memories like invisible chains. Whenever they spoke of the front, the factories, or the planes, their voices betrayed a quiet awe. The war had been human, tangible, immediate, until they had seen the industrial heartbeat of America. And now every strategy, every plan, every hope of victory had to contend with a machine far greater than any battlefield courage. Reinhardt lay on his bunk one night, staring at the dark rafters. He could still hear the echo of engines, the clatter of tools, the roar of planes lifting into the sky. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, almost inaudibly, "If this is just the beginning, what becomes of us?" The question lingered, unanswered, heavy with uncertainty, as the camp settled into uneasy silence. Outside, the horizon glowed faintly with the distant lights of factories, a reminder that the war was no longer just fought in the skies or on the battlefields. It was already being decided in steel, sweat, and smoke. And in that quiet, almost imperceptible moment, every POW understood something essential and terrifying. They had glimpsed the unstoppable engine of America, and the shadow it cast over Europe was growing by the day.